So what is this thing called a perfectly competitive market? A perfectly competitive market has three distinguishing characteristics. Number one, a large number of buyers interacts with a large number of sellers. Now, large is not a precise number. Large means that each buyer and seller has such a small share of the market that no individual buyer or seller can affect the market price noticeably. The market for IBM Class A stock is a good example of a large number of buyers and sellers. Generally, the decision of an individual to buy or sell shares affects the demand and supply so little that the individual can buy or sell as much as he or she wants without affecting the market price. Parenthetically, of course, the market price would change if many people decide to sell or if many people decide to buy. The second characteristic is that the products offered by the sellers are perfect substitutes. When products are perfect substitutes, buyers always prefer to purchase from the seller with the lowest price. Products are not perfect substitutes when sellers differentiate their products by quality, reputation, location, or brand name appeal. A good example of sellers offering perfect substitutes is the market for IBM Class A stock. Buyers always prefer to purchase shares at the lowest price available, regardless of whether the seller is a large mutual fund or a little old lady from Pasadena. And the third characteristic is that entry into and exit from the industry are free. This means that incumbent firms do not have any advantages over new entrants. Both incumbents and entrants have access to the same cost structures and produce goods that consumers view as perfect substitutes. The market for IBM Class A stock is a decent example. Anyone who wants to enter the market as a buyer or seller can do so by paying a small transaction fee to a broker. While the brokerage fees are barriers to entry and exit, they are small. ManQ calls this market structure competitive without the adjective perfect or perfectly in front of it. Most other textbooks call it perfectly competitive. The instructor tends to use the two terms interchangeably unless he states otherwise. He often uses, quote, parentheses, perfectly, close parentheses, competitive. Here are some examples of perfectly competitive markets. The best examples of perfectly competitive markets are markets for commodities and many financial assets. The previous section showed how the market for IBM Class A stock fits the perfectly competitive market structure well. Let's examine two more markets. The market in which farmers sell wheat fits the perfectly competitive market structure well. A large number of buyers and sellers exist because wheat farmers compete with other farmers around the world. Since the market is so large, even a large wheat farmer in the Midwest of the United States produces so little wheat that she could not increase the market price by withholding her crop, nor could she decrease the market price by doubling her output. Winter wheat is a commodity. A pound of winter wheat sold by one farmer is a perfect substitute for a pound of winter wheat sold by another farmer. And finally, farmers can usually enter and exit the market freely. To exit, all a farmer must do is plant soybeans or corn instead of wheat. To enter, all the farmer must do is plant wheat instead of soybeans and corn. The second market is the federal funds market. The federal funds market fits the perfectly competitive market structure well. The federal funds market brings together banks wanting to borrow money for overnight use with banks wanting to lend excess reserves. A large number of banks in the U.S. compete to be borrowers and lenders. A dollar loan by one bank is usually a perfect substitute for a dollar loan by another bank, and entry and exit is free. Any bank with deficient reserves may borrow. Any bank with excess reserves may lend. The Federal Reserve Bank matches borrowers and lenders. However, even good examples of industries that fit the perfectly competitive market structure will, let's start that over. However, even good examples of industries that fit the perfectly competitive market structure will usually deviate slightly from the characteristics of perfect competition. Here are some ways that the markets for IBM Class A stock, commodities, and financial assets deviate from the characteristics of perfect competition. As we noted earlier, brokerage fees represent small barriers in the market for IBM Class A stock. We talked about wheat. Sometimes governments restrict how farmers can use their land, thereby creating barriers to entry in some agricultural commodity markets. We talked about the federal funds rate for overnight funds. Sometimes a dollar or commodity sold by one seller is not a perfect substitute for a dollar or commodity sold by another seller. During financial crises, banks may prefer to borrow money from other banks that are less likely to go bankrupt and will pay higher interest rates to banks that are viewed as safer. The commodity would be an example of a commodity is bullion gold. When South America practiced apartheid, the city of Richmond would not buy bullion gold from South Africa, even though bullion gold is the same regardless of where it is mined. The city also would not take a loan from a bank that loaned to South Africa. By refusing to work with banks that loaned to South Africa, the city sometimes paid a higher interest rate than it could have. Now, perfectly competitive industries, or even industries that come close to perfect competition, are the exception, not the rule. Most industries are not perfectly competitive. Perfect competition is one of four basic market structures. The other three basic market structures are monopoly, monopolistic competition, and oligopoly. Most industries fit better the characteristics of monopoly, monopolistic competition, or oligopoly than perfect competition. We will examine the other three market structures later in the course. The relationship between the demand curve facing the firm and the demand for the product is very important to keep straight and distinct. The market demand curve for a product is downward sloping, but the demand curve facing a competitive firm is a horizontal line at the market price. The demands for wheat, loanable funds, and individual stocks obey the law of demand. The quantity demanded of the good in the market decreases at the market price increases. In a competitive market or industry, the supply of the good in the market and the demand for the good in the market determines the market price. Since each firm's output does not affect the market price, each firm can sell as little or as much as it wants at that market price. Since the firm can increase or decrease output without affecting the price it can charge, the demand curve facing the firm is a horizontal line at the market price. The paragraphs below illustrate this difference. So here's the demand curve in the market. It's got a negative slope. There's a supply curve in the market, positive slope. Their intersection determines the market price of 20. Well, the demand facing the firm is a horizontal line at 20. This individual firm can sell as much or as little as it wants at that market price because its quantities, which go from 0 to 60, are so small relative to the market quantity, which is 35 million per day. The red line in the panel is the demand for beef cattle in the world market. It shows that the quantity demanded in the world market falls from 50 million cattle per day to 20 million cattle per day when the market price increases from 10 to 30. There's 10, there's 30. So the quantity, there's 10, there's 30. So the quantity goes from 50 down to 20 as price rises. The intersection of supply and demand determine the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity traded. The equilibrium market price is 20, and the equilibrium quantity traded is 35 million cattle per day. The yellow line in the panel on the right is the demand facing the individual beef rancher. It shows she can charge $20 when she offers 10 cattle per day, and $20 when she offers 55 cattle per day. Since the quantity she is offering for sale is so small relative to the quantity traded in the world market, she can increase or decrease the quantity she offers for sale without affecting the price in the world market. She can sell as little or as much as she wants at the market price. This flat demand curve means that price equals marginal revenue for a perfectly competitive firm. Here's a simple example using the demand curve for the farmer. When quantity is 10, price is 20, so total revenue is going to be 200. That's 10 times 20. When quantity rises to 11, price remains constant, so total revenue now goes to $220. That's 11 times 20. As output rises by 1, total revenue rises by 20. If we divide 20 by 1, we'll get the marginal revenue of $20. When output increases by 1, total revenue increases by 20. The marginal revenue of the 11th unit of output is $20. Notice, the price of output is 20, and that equals the marginal revenue of each extra unit of output. As we'll see in later lessons, price equals marginal revenue is unique to perfect competition. Price is greater than marginal revenue when the firm is a monopolistic competitor, or an oligopolist.